Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Icebreakers GameDev. We're back after a little summer break, and I hope you've all had a good summer just as much as we have. So my name is Sylvia Dewar, and I'm one of the hosts of Icebreakers. I work for Nonita, the Norwegian network for video game companies that works with the Norwegian games industry. In Icebreakers, we like to introduce different aspects of game development that people aren't always aware of, and this week we're going to be talking about AI programming in games. And with me, I have two wonderful guests. But right before we start, I'd just like to let you know, for those of you watching, please don't hesitate to send us questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them when we can. All right, so please, joining me today, we have Jane Emily Armstrong. Would you like to do a small little introduction?
Yeah, so I've been in the games industry about 8 years now. I started my work at Ubisoft, where I worked with Jonathan on a R&D and internal consultancy team that basically jumped around from project to project, making prototypes and implementing them. And now I'm at Starbreeze, worked on automatic testing for Payday, and now for the new project Baxter.
Thank you. And Jonathan?
Hi, my name's Jonathan Martin. I've been around the game industry for over 15 years now, always in AAA, working on big open world titles such as Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2, GTA 5, Assassin's Creed Origins, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, as well as Ghost Recon Wildlands. I've also done some research. I was an AI researcher before I got into the industry, and as Jane mentioned, I did a stint of that at Ubisoft as well. So Oh, excuse me. And currently I'm at IO Interactive on Project Fantasy, a new, almost unannounced project. So I love video games. I love everything about developing them, and I try and through my career, I've tried to experience, all sides of game development.
Thank you so much. So we are talking about AI programming, and if you could, because it feels to me a little bit like a vague term, can you tell me a little bit about what it exactly entails, or what does it mean? What is AI programming? Jane?
Yeah, to me, like the issue is it is kind of vague to define because it kind of also depends per company, per like part of the industry, part of and like it's interesting to see as well because in the last few years I feel it's evolved as well because originally it was basically an offshoot of gameplay programmer, where gameplay programmers eventually realized, oh, we're doing more with our agents than we're doing with the like gameplay. So they wanted a separate title, and that's where it kind of started with agent behavior and like how enemies and friendly NPCs interacted with in games. And then later it kind of morphed, and now it kind of covers like both that plus a bunch of like management systems, as well as like on my side automatic testing and stuff like that. So it's kind of like expanding and becoming kind of nebulous on our terms too. And like when people think of it from the outside, they also think of like a bunch of stuff that we don't cover as much in the games industry.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, so there's an academic field called AI with a lot of subfields, and in industry these days, AI is a very hot topic, and what they refer to in AI in the tech industry at large is just one field of academic AI. But Jane hit upon the key point that in the game industry, when we talk about AI, we're really talking about character behavior and agent behavior. Even the other two examples that you mentioned at the end, automated testing and like higher level management systems, you can kind of conceptualize those as agents as well. Like you create agents to play test the game. You create an agent that oversees the things that are happening in the game. Some of that does overlap with academic AI. Like there's a part of our job where we do need to interact with that stuff, read those papers. But by and large, that's not what we're talking about in the game industry. again, in our industry, when we say AI, we mean character behavior.
But that is really interesting, and I think very relevant, because I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding around what AI in games really is. So let's hear a little bit about your background, if I may ask. How did you end up as an AI programmer? Jonathan, I'd like to start.
So I actually, I was fortunate enough to when I did my undergraduate at Lehigh University, in the computer science department, there was at the time one of the very few game AI labs in the country. They did a lot with case-based reasoning as well as GOAP, goal-oriented action planning. We don't need to go what it is into what it is right now, but if you're an AI programmer or aspiring AI programmer, you're familiar with it. Those are the sort of things that came out of this lab. So I got a taste of it early, and I really, really enjoyed it. I ended up going to grad school in a more practical video game development program, and immediately jumped into the industry as an AI programmer. I really love the idea of sort of creating systems to manage the game experience and improve the game experience, whether that's via characters or whether that's via like we put a man behind the curtain or something like that. I find it really rewarding to improve games in that way. And anyway, since you asked about my background, I first started at Rockstar Games, where we did Red Dead Redemption 1, where I was the navigation programmer working on uh, pathfinding and dynamic avoidance for what was at that time a very large number of simultaneous characters. It's more than 10 years old, and modern generations have surpassed that quite a bit. But at the time, it was pretty ambitious. Then we went on and did GTA 5, which again was really increased the scale quite a bit. Then I jumped over to Ubisoft, working on Assassin's Creed Origins, which was kind of a reboot for that series. They redid a lot of the tech on that one, and we had to reauthor a lot of the AI systems from scratch, frankly, to support the scale that they wanted to take that series to. And then Valhalla again was continuing on that. Now I'm working at IO Interactive and Project Fantasy, which is, we've not said much about it, but what we have said is that it's an online fantasy RPG, with I think it's safe to say a very big scale that we're going for, and with the online aspect, it's another another axis on which we want to improve the game and just continue to push the limits of what we can do with game AI.
Thank you. And Jane, how did you end up as an AI programmer?
Yeah, so I had kind of a similar start as Jonathan. I was at Kingston University in London, working at doing computer science with games programming as my bachelor, and they had a game AI course at that point, which I found particularly interesting. So when it was time for my master's, I went into information science and basically specialized in AI, and that was also more general AI, but also a lot more directly tied to game AI. Wrote my master's thesis on simulating emotions and personality in AI, and then like Jonathan hired me to Ubisoft after I got a scholarship from the IGA, and yeah, there I worked on Division 2. I also worked a bit on the Avatar game, and a lot of in-house R&D. I also helped with a few like system concepts for like various systems in games like Assassin's Creed Origins and stuff. Then I moved over to Starbreeze in 2020, worked on Payday for automated testing, where I created a bot that plays through our game. And now I'm basically doing both that bot and for our live development. And developing a new one for our next game, Project Baxter, which is set in the D&D universe.
Ooh, exciting. Thank you guys so much. That is really you both have worked on really heavy hitters. Some of those games that you've worked on, and I can imagine the scale must have been quite enormous when you're working on those games. So can you tell me a little bit about, for you, the difference between a regular programmer and an AI programmer in games? Jane, if you'd like to start.
I'd say that's kind of a difficult thing to answer because,
Mm.
like, programmer, I'd say is like the subfield where, like, basically game AI would be a specialization. So generally, programming covers like all programming. That would be like from the people who do engine to the people who focus on physics to the people who focus on like the graphics to people who focus on gameplay. And by gameplay, I mean pretty much like player interactions and like how the player plays, essentially. And that also is kind of where AI comes from. So it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of a subfield of that. But yeah, it's essentially programming. But yeah, we generally, when we talk about specializations, it's basically comes down to someone who does graphics programming might be focusing on slightly different algorithms than we are, for instance, but it's still algorithms and code.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, you have to be a good game developer to be a good AI programmer. There's no getting around having to learn the basics, how to write high performance code, maintainable code, how to work with non-technical people to implement what the spec is for your project. All that stuff doesn't change whether you're a game AI programmer or anything else. Again, I'm probably just sounds like I'm saying the same thing as Jane, but like we the papers we read are different. The specific domain knowledge that we need to have is different than, I mean, among each specialty. But that's about it. You know, it's the our we have a slightly different bag of tricks maybe, but we're all doing the same job.
So what does a day as an AI programmer look like for you, Jonathan?
So one difference actually between game AI programmers and some other game programmers on the team is we have probably the closest relationship to the designers. Very often, although we're not credited as designers, because there's so much overlap between what the game design is and what the characters in that game should do. Like we really have to be on the same page as them. So the first thing, like I would say our primary, our highest priority about the day is make sure that our designers are able to do their jobs. Are they blocked by anything? Do they have the tools they need to deliver the game that we all want to deliver? And we work in a very tight loop with them. Then on top of that, we have our backlog tasks, which are things that we internally as the tech team know that we're going to need to deliver by the time the game ships, but no one is necessarily asking for outside of us. It's just something that like we expect if we're going to ship a game on this platform with this number of characters to support and this number, et cetera, et cetera. Like we know there's certain things that we're going to have to deliver technically, and we have those in a backlog as well. So there's a back and forth between making sure that our designers are unblocked, they have what they need. They're not confused about what's happening in the game because of, you know, somebody's doing something weird and they don't have a debug tool to understand that. There's that, and then there's the grind of developing big systems, which is probably not unlike any large code base game developer or not. We've got things in the backlog and we churn through them.
Thank you. I'm kind of wondering then, just as a little addendum or a question to it, is your day very similar, or does it, based on like where you are in the game, does your day change a lot? I mean, like like your day to day, is it very different based on when in the game, or is it you have that list of things you got to get through, and that's what you're working on?
There's probably more like as you get down to a milestone, there's the feedback loop gets tighter, I would say.
Mhm.
Like our primary priority with respect to the designers is making sure they're unblocked, making sure that they can do what they can do. But like there's a for what they want to see next, there's a sort of like push and pull where like we're going to do a review, come up with some feedback, turn that into action items, get it to the programmers to do the thing, and then review again. There's like a cycle that's constantly ongoing. As you get towards the end of the project, towards a milestone, that cycle gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And very often, whereas like maybe earlier in the project you're on a weekly review cadence, towards the end of the project you might be doing it every other day or daily, or worst case twice a day feedback cycle where you're just okay, like we're going to minimize it, like find the highest priority items, get those in the game, and we'll iterate on that, So the velocity changes, I'd say, throughout the project.
Thank you. Jane, how about you? What does a day in your life look like as an AI programmer in
Uh,
games?
so in general, I would actually echo what Jonathan is saying, but being on auto testing, I do have some differences from there. I work a lot more with the engine people than a general AI programmer, I'd say, especially because I'm part of the engine team here at Starbreeze. But for me, it's also very important to like stay in touch with like designers, other AI programmers, so we can share systems. It's also very important to talk a lot to QA and like how I can help them in these systems. So yeah, like it's mainly that kind of stuff. Communication is the main thing, and like if there's one thing I would say, don't leave your AI people out of the loop.
Uh, that's good advice. So that I mean that kind of leads into the next question. So what is it important to know, or what are important things to know about working with an AI programmer? Like, what would you hope that your colleagues understand about your work? You gave the suggestion of making sure that you're held in the loop, Jane. Any other advice or important things you think it's to know?
So just to finish the point of keeping in the loop, yeah, I work on multiple projects at once, so it's a good idea to that I am informed and like keep in the meetings, despite the structure of the team. So especially for auto testing, it's easy to be not prioritized on the same level as general AI in terms of information, and that's a thing. But yeah, it's generally, like I'd say, the things that people should know is don't overhype any like certain type of AI. In the end, it's like all tools. So like tools to achieve certain goals and tools to like achieve certain outcomes. And I feel sometimes things can be overhyped by the premise of them. And I think that's one thing to know, other than like communication, I'd say is a general thing for the games industry. Everyone
Mm,
needs to communicate.
definitely. But I think that it's something we have to also be careful of because there's also the risk of too much like meetings that are too many meetings taking place all the time. But communication is really important. Everybody is connected, right, to create this game. How about you, Jonathan? Is there anything important that you'd like your people to know about working in AI?
Um, we create the impression that our the agents in our games are very often like these robotic, logical agents that exists in this abstract game world. But the truth of it is that game AI involves primarily smoke and mirrors. Like we're not simulating agents' internal states as much as we are writing rules and systems to get a desired outcome. And
Mm.
when you anthropomorphize the game AI too much, you can often get into a place where you can say, like, "Oh, he's doing this. It should be very obvious that he could do this thing that's similar but not quite the same." When in fact, due to the design of the game, like we've maybe optimized things in a certain way that may not necessarily be possible. So yeah, keep in mind that we're really just faking it. We're trying to do a really good job faking it at the end of the day, and things that might seem straightforward to do are not always that straightforward, depending on the choices you've made.
That's really interesting to know, and also I can understand how it's easy for people to think that these similarities, it must be easy to implement, but when you have the big games that you're working on, I can imagine there is so much and so many details that you have to be aware of and have to change. So and as a little side tangent to that, what do you think is the most common misunderstanding about AI programming in
I would
games?
say we addressed it at the beginning. I think especially now that AI is so big in the tech industry at large, people have a preconceived notion of what it is, and we've been using that term differently for decades at this point. So I think that's the primary contention that people are familiar with certain algorithms and certain techniques, and it's simply not the realm that we're in. Not that we're not interested in those things for solving certain problems that we may have, but for a lot of different reasons, real-time character behavior isn't the most obvious place to deploy some of those algorithms right now.
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, I would actually echo Jonathan very heavily on this answer. I think the one place I'd add more would be, yeah, like, actually, I don't have that much to add here. Jonathan covered it pretty well.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. So now we're going to go into now we've done a little bit of the background and talking about what AI programming is in games and the general basis. And now we're going to go into some of the fun questions, in my opinion, because I have to ask you, what is the most memorable project or AI that you have worked on as an AI programmer? Jane?
Yeah, I'd say my current project because, yeah, I get to do a lot of fun AI just to make my bot run around and work with stuff. It still has some pain in the ass moments, but sorry for the wording. But yeah, like generally, I've had a lot of fun because one, I have a lot of control, and two, like I get to do a lot of cool stuff because like a lot of the problem space is a little bit different from general AI because I need the bot to play the game like a player would, or like not necessarily, but use the same interactions, and that means a different way of interacting with the world than general AI would, and so on. And that adds some complications that wouldn't generally be there, and I find that interesting.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this, but could you tell me a little, do you have an example of a complication or something that you've worked on that was a bit surprising?
Well, to just throw in a rudimentary one, like Payday, we have a bunch of things you can interact with. So key cards, money bags, yeah, like key card readers, and like a bunch of things to interact with. If general AI is going to interact with, all we need to do is move it close to it, and then have like a interaction trigger go to the object. For me to imitate how a player would interact with that, I needed to know one, what position to stand in to interact with it. No, it has a clear line of sight at any one point. Know that it can interact and like whether it should interact given the test parameters. And also know like stuff like how does it interact? Like, does it just look at the thing and press the button? Does it just look at the thing, hold the button? Does it go over to a thing and just stand on the thing? Does it like yeah? Does it have a carrying capacity of one bag, and should it prioritize one bag over another? Stuff like that, and that's like complications that quite often, like general AI, won't have to consider.
And is it things that you end up choosing for what you're building, or is that something that came across as something you found as you were going along?
Well, a lot of this was stuff that needed to be in by like the core design requirements of it. We wanted bots that actually imitated the players. So
Hmm.
for that, like a lot of the initial things I mentioned, basically means that the bot needs to be able to control the player in a way where like it knows where to look and like how to interact with something from the player's point of view. But again, like as Jonathan mentioned in the last one, a lot of that can be covered by smoke and mirrors too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And how about you, Jonathan? Any cool, memorable projects?
I have two. The first one I would say was the first Red Dead Redemption. Um, these days, so it was a relatively early capital O, capital W open world game before a lot of the conventions of that genre were super well established. Um, so the AI in particular has this legacy of non-open world games that I think was really cool to deal with in an open world environment. For example, like the perception systems that we had, the for AI attention and things like that were very complex for an open world game like that, and I'm not sure you would do it that way these days. But it was kind of immersive simmy in a way in an open world that in a way that I thought was really cool. The other thing I really liked about that project is every NPC was capable of interacting with the world in multiple modes. They could get into combat on foot with guns and whatnot. They could ride on a horse and do horse races. They could play all of our mini games, and we had a personality model that maintained an agent's personality throughout those games. So they would act the same way. They would act true to their personality in a mini game as well as in combat as well as in racing. So like if somebody was more reckless, they would race recklessly. They would play poker more recklessly. If someone would bluff, if like we would have characters that would pull their gun on you but wouldn't be willing to shoot and they would run away if you shot back, those guys would also bluff in the poker game and things like that. Which I think maybe it's not something that stands out, but I hope that that's one of those things that sort of adds to the verisimilitude of that game as you're playing it for a long time. Max Payne 3 is the other one that's really memorable for me because to this date, it is the only non-open world game that I have ever worked on. And because of that, it was level based. We had very small number of agents to deal with relative to an open world game. So we were basically it was the only game that I've ever worked on where we were really able to crank the smartness dial like really high up on the AI and have them do like real like group strategic planning and like with like coordinated flanking and things like that. And we could spend a relatively large amount of CPU cycles and memory on that stuff because the population count wasn't super high. So when I look back at that game, I'm really happy. Really like for one time in my career, we were able to just like let the AI run and really try and do something smart. So I appreciate it for that.
Can I ask a small little question to that? Because you were mentioning a lot of this behavior and having this behavior over many different types of actions. How much psychology goes into your work? Is it you who decides it, or is it the designers that decide it? What, where does psychology come in? Because I mean, it must come in.
Player psychology
Yeah.
or like in-game agent psychology.
In-game agent psychology is what I was thinking.
Um, I would say it plays a role. I don't know, Jane. Do you have anything do you want to jump in on that question? I'd have to think about it slightly.
Sorry.
I
Like
mean,
the answer is yes. Psychology does play a role. Uh, in terms of, I would say it mostly plays a role in terms of like how we define the affordances of the world. Like the big thing is like making sure that via the actions that we make available to the agents, they can express like whatever inner state we expect them to have in the game. Like if if I'm playing like, so I'm in AAA, we deal with a lot of like, I've only ever been in AAA. Like a big thing that we have to deal with in AAA is like tactical squad based shooters. Like I've got some guys on my team and we're doing combat with another team, and we've got to figure everything out. Like if you want to be able to any personality that you want, you want the agents to like any psychological model that you want the agents to have is only as good as the affordances that you give them, like the tools you give them to express that in the game. And that is very much a back and forth with every other system, with audio, with animation, with game design, with the physics programmers. Like what are these guys going to be capable of? And we try and maximize that so that we have the biggest palette possible to say, okay, you can do this kind of thing when you're feeling like this. You can do this kind of thing when you're feeling like this. And then we can show like internal state, like we can model like, oh, this guy's scared, this guy's aggressive, this guy is stoic, so on and so forth. Like, I don't know if that's where you were going with
Yeah, no,
psychology, but that's sort of
I
how
was. Thank you, thank you. I know this was a little bit of a little side question that I just came up with, but I appreciate taking the time to explain it. So from going from games you've worked on to games that you haven't, or potentially you have, but is there a game with AI from NPCs to world simulation that absolutely blew your mind? Jane, do you have any games?
I mean, for me, it's kind of complex because I have a few that, like, in principle, blew my mind for various reasons, but it's not necessarily ones that blew everyone's mind out of that. But, like, I really appreciate stuff like Days Gone and Plague Tale just because of the large sizes of enemies they have in certain scenes and, like, how they manage those and, like, that also comes down to stuff like how the animation loops for those work sometimes, because like they have some impressive animation loops on their side, and that's not our side really. Depends on the project. Then like I also in concept enjoy Rain World because Rain World has some really cool interaction systems between the enemies where like they basically have a full like habitat environment, and they interact with each other based on like predator prey dynamics, and like they also try to hunt various foods and like yeah, try to outsmart the player to a certain degree too within that.
Thank you, thank you. And Jonathan, do you have any favorites?
Yeah, so the game that actually made me want to be a game AI programmer was quite old at this point, God, 20 years old at this point, called No One Lives Forever 2. I didn't play the first one, so I don't know what was unique to the second and what was like shared between the two of them. But it's a stealth-ish FPS, level based, and structurally it's not too different from like a lot of the other FPSs that were coming out around that time in the 2000s. Like you go from level to level going around the world, like you have some objective or multiple objectives that you have to do and then get out of the level. But like the thing that really blew my mind about it was that like, yes, like the levels are pretty typical. Like, yes, okay, so I need to infiltrate this like secret agent base where there's like guys walking around patrolling with guns and stuff. Like that wasn't new or anything at the time, but like the game was the first that I played to like simulate what those guys when they were doing when they were off duty. Like, yes, we're working at the evil genius like Volcano Lab, but somebody still has to make the coffee. Like, people still get pissed off if somebody doesn't turn off the lights when they leave the room. And like, it just opened up like it made these places so real. Like when you could go and like knock over a bottle and then somebody would notice that it got knocked over, and but he wouldn't get mad at me, he'd get mad at somebody else in the room and things like that. Yeah, the fact that they knew when you left the lights on, I'd never seen that before, and even today, like that's not something that you see much of in games. So yeah, that was a very that had a very strong impact on me, especially because I played in college when I was thinking about like where I wanted to go next as a career, and seeing that I thought like, oh wow, like doing stuff like this is what I want to do with my career.
So, do you feel that because of that interaction, do you encourage that kind of interaction yourself in your games, in the programming that you're doing now? Because it sounds like it kind of goes into our next question, right? It's a cool moment of NPCs maybe reacting in ways you didn't expect. And
Mhm.
do you try to work with that now in your own games?
Always, but again, that comes back to the back and forth with game designers. Like you have to have buy-in from the designers that they want to make a game about what happens when, like, what happens when the elite soldiers go off duty or things like that. Like you have to buy in for, like, okay, this is a part of the experience that we want to focus on. So that's really big. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
No. It's just, do you encourage unexpected interactions in your own programming? That was mainly it, but you try,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. You try and do what you can, and yeah, that's something that's always like you want to do it in a way that brings people joy and doesn't make them think the game is broken.
Yeah. And Jane, how about you? Any unexpected interactions that you kind of encourage in your programming?
I mean, for like automated testing, you actually don't want too much like randomness, because you want it to be somewhat deterministic in the results you get, so like it's this thing that is the error here and so on. But yeah, like in general, in our games we do have some like pretty interesting interactions, uh, like various guards trying to interact in various ways, and that's also kind of where that psychology question comes in, because one thing that I find interesting is stuff that would have been considered psychological before are now just kind of standard in how we think about like AI, and that's kind of, it's got a psychological basis, but it hasn't been thought of as a psychological thing in like decades at this point. And yeah, but yeah, we do have some interesting interactions and like some cool like in character moments and stuff in various other games. But yeah, in automatic testing, you don't want that kind of stuff, other than like maybe you can convince some audio guy to make you a cool voice line for something.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Okay, so we're reaching the end of our talk today, but I do have one last question, if that's okay for everybody. So, very often, a lot of our viewers are students that are looking to get into the games industry or are working actively to get into the games industry. And I was wondering if you might have any tips to somebody out there who wants to be an AI programmer but doesn't know where to start.
As we said earlier in the call, in order to be a good game AI programmer, you have to be a good game programmer. So, like, get the experience, working with an engine, shipping a game from start to finish, getting experience with all stages of production. Make sure that you know how to write performance-oriented code. If you can do all that, then, like, again, as we said, like, we have a kind of a specific domain knowledge compared to the other specialties, and then you could, once you have the programming basics down, then you can start reading up on game AI. Some good references if you don't know where to get started. The Game AI Pro series. There's physical books as well as like a website which has a lot of really good post-mortem analysis of like popular games that you may have played if you wanted to understand how those work. The YouTube channel AI in Games is a bit in the same direction. But with YouTube content, I think they have a Substack now if you prefer a newsletter format. Um, if you're a good game programmer and you're up to speed on that stuff, I'd say you're like 99% of the way there.
Thank you. And Jane?
Yeah, like I've spoken to a few students who basically have been focusing on like getting into game AI, but then end up like in courses that focus entirely on the academic AI. And like I think the gameplay side is important to know. Like a lot of the academic, as we mentioned, is very good to know. There's a lot of like systems and calculations and algorithms that do carry over from the academic, but it's not necessarily one-to-one. And sometimes it's, yeah, as Jonathan mentioned, it's a very good idea to get more into the game stuff. To add a reference point to that, GDC, this doesn't just go for games, but GDC publishes all their talks for free after 2 years. So there's a lot of great AI talks there. And they're
Yes, there's a dedicated AI summit at GDC every year. So there's like, it's very heavy on AI content. That's good.
Yeah, so that's a really good source of really interesting AI talks.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Well, that is going to be that is going to be our talk for today, and I really appreciate you both joining me. I'd also like to give a thank you to Vivian, who is our producer in the background with us. And before we head out, do you have any games or social medias you'd like to plug, Jane?
I mean, Payday and
Yeah.
Baxter when that comes out. Other than that, got friends who worked on the new Star Wars game for Ubisoft, so I guess I'll say that too. Yeah, social media, if you want to get a hold of me, I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest. And I think there's a link, a post with my LinkedIn on it. So
Yeah.
I guess that's it.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
IOI.dk/careers, IOI.dk/careers, IOI.dk/careers. We are hiring very heavily for my project as well as other projects. I don't know if it's up yet, but we hope to be hiring another AI programmer. That would be very cool. Yeah. I know the video game industry is in a bit of a moment of contraction right now, but we are expanding. We're looking to hire. So if you go to that site and see something that might be a good match, please apply. And if you want to find me on Twitter, Twitter/X, Department Store Spook is my personal account. Feel free to follow me. I only occasionally talk about video games.
Thank you so much. Okay, everyone. Oh, sorry, Jane.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, we're also right now hiring for lead gameplay programmers for our project Baxter. So yeah, right now we aren't expanding as much as IO, but we are looking for a lead gameplay programmer.
That is great to know. That is great. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for the talk today. And thank you for those of you tuning in and watching us. We'll be back in a few months with the next Icebreakers. And have a wonderful rest of the week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.